Cheers, everyone. Welcome to the New Populist. I am Dave Brown. I have an interesting article to bring you back from 1996, an article written by Time magazine. Now, these last 6 years, we have talked so much about Russia interfering in our democracy. We've heard it ad nauseum. The idea that a foreign power would interfere in our democratic process is apparently the worst thing you could possibly do. But my question is this a two-way street? Do we respect the democracies of other countries? Well, off the bat, we can go ahead and point out the CIA and the State Department, how they've been funding one side over another side because that one side supports our interest. And of course, the CIA funds guerrilla movements in the third world. And they have done this for the last 60, 70 years. Now, I want America to be number one. I'm an American. I want America to make the world a better place. But we cannot do that if we are hypocrites, if we have a different standard for ourselves than other countries. If we're going to demand that countries respect democracy, we need to respect democracy. And we have consistently not done that for the last 60, 70 years. So this article from Time is called Rescuing Boris, the secret story of how 4 U.S. advisors use polls, focus groups, negative ads, and all the other techniques of American campaigning to help Boris Yeltsin win. And I've said before that the United States wanted Boris Yeltsin in there after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He essentially was allowing the West to creep into Russia. Now, Russia has had a weird relationship with Europe the last several hundred years. They're part of Europe, but at the same time, they're partway in Asia. They kind of straddle the two cultures. And Europe has never fully accepted Russia as being a purely European country. And the West hadn't gotten their tentacles into Russia because of this weird sort of divide between Europe and Russia, the cultural differences, the geography. So it's been a weird sort of relationship the last, few hundred years between Europe and Russia. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States was hoping, and Europe as well, that we could finally absorb Russia into our Western system. And of course, Russia has a lot of resources. And we would love to have our American companies in Russia to exploit some of those resources. And we thought that Boris Yeltsin would be the guy for that, which is why we supported him. And when Putin came into power later, he sort of reversed some of the things that Yeltsin was doing as far as access of the Western financial system into Russia. And that's kind of why we, hate Putin. And we want to overthrow Putin and have a more West-friendly regime put in place, like we've done in dozens of other countries the last several decades. So I'm going to read this story, and it's funny because this story is being cast as, these 4 guys just wanted to help the Russians, and they went over there and they did this, and it was sort of all on their own. But when you read the story and you see some of the connections, you have to immediately ask yourself, what involvement did the CIA and State Department have in this matter? So let me start here with this first part of the article. It says, the outcome was by no means inevitable. Last winter, Yeltsin's approval ratings were in the single digits. There are many reasons for his change in fortune, but a crucial one has remained a secret. For 4 months, a group of American political consultants clandestinely participated in guiding Yeltsin's campaign. Here is the inside story of how these advisors helped Yeltsin achieve the victory that will keep reform in Russia alive. Now, this Time article, again, it was printed just after these elections in 1996. Of course, they weren't privy to what would come the next 20 years. It goes on and says, most of Yeltsin's confidants believed the president would be magically reelected despite the doom of catastrophe. But Brainin, and he was living in the United States, this Brainin character, and he is the one that was involved in starting this effort up to bring American advisors to Russia, to Yeltsin, to help him in this campaign. The president, he reasoned, could lose without the same kind of professional assistance U.S. office seekers employ as a matter of course. Brainin began a series of confidential discussions with Yeltsin's aides, including one with the first Deputy Prime Minister, Oleg Soskovets, who at the time was in charge of the president's nascent re-election effort. Finally, early in February, Brainin was instructed to find some Americans, but to proceed discreetly. Secrecy was paramount, says Brainin. Everyone realized that if the communists knew about this before the election, they would attack Yeltsin as an American tool. We badly needed the team, but having them was a big risk. So listen to that and think about the 2016 elections. Just the idea that there were Russians supposedly involved in our elections were enough to launch all these counterintelligence campaigns against Donald Trump, all these accusations. Now, it turned out the Russians, bots and Facebook ads, they did some very surface level stuff, but nothing to actually change the outcome of the election. I would submit to you that the FBI and CIA have way more to do as far as determining the outcome of elections than the Russians ever did. But here we are back in 96, wanting to insert these 4 Americans, but it had to be done secretly because the communists couldn't find out. This needed to be clandestine. It goes on. To find some Americans, Brainin worked through Fred Lowell, a San Francisco lawyer with close ties to California's Republican Party. On February 14th, Lowell called Joe Shumate, a GOP expert in political data analysis who had served as Deputy Chief of Staff to California Governor Pete Wilson. Since Wilson's drive for the 1996 Republican presidential nomination had ended only before it began, Lowell thought Shumate and George Gorton, Wilson's longtime top strategist, might be able to help Yeltsin. They immediately enlisted Richard Dresner, a New York-based consultant who had worked with them on many of Wilson's campaigns. Now, here's where it connects to the Clinton administration, and here's where I would say the CIA, State Department, and Clinton administration knew what was going on. Dresner had another connection that would prove useful later on. In the late 1970s and early 80s, he had joined with Dick Morse to help Bill Clinton get elected governor of Arkansas. As Clinton's current political guru, Morse became the middleman on those few occasions when the Americans sought the administration's help in Yeltsin's re-election drive. So while Clinton was uninvolved with Yeltsin's recruitment of the American advisors, the administration knew of their existence, and although Dresner denies dealing with Morse, 3 other sources have told time that on at least 2 occasions, the team's contacts with Morse were helpful. Now, we have to remember, if this is in Time magazine, we're getting the public narrative of what happened. I will submit that there was much more going on in the background than they're actually acknowledging. Article goes on to say, the Americans managed to hide their identities for many months. In interviewing various polling and focus group companies before hiring 3, they described themselves as representing Americans eager to sell thin-screen televisions in Russia. That story held for far longer than it ever should have, says Shumate. The Americans carried multiple entry visas, identifying them as working for the administration of the President of the Russian Federation. a bit of obviousness that constantly threatened to undermine all the supposed secrecy surrounding their real work. So these Americans were in Russia under false pretenses, running their operation. Now, just again, imagine 4 Russians here on invitation of the U.S. president to help him run his campaign. Could you imagine the fireworks that ever happened? And of course, if this were a Democrat, maybe that could happen and be swept aside. But Donald Trump, if he were to do that, and I'm guessing some people will claim that he did when he didn't, the level of freak out would be insane. He would absolutely be frog marched to prison if that ever did occur. Of course, it didn't. But I'm just trying to compare the two scenarios and say, what if something even remotely similar happened in this country? How we would treat it as an absolute threat to our democracy. Yet here we are, 1996 in Russia, doing just that. And the last little bit from this article, last week, Russia took a historic step away from its totalitarian past. Democracy triumphed, and along with it came the tools of modern campaigns, including the trickery and slickery Americans know so well. If those tools are not always admirable, the result they helped achieve in Russia surely is. But just as in America, the consultants can only take Yeltsin so far. Now, what is the slogan for the Washington Post? Democracy dies in darkness. But somehow here in Russia, it says democracy triumphed, although they acknowledged that it had trickery and slickery, and it was done clandestinely. This is the sort of hypocrisy that makes it hard for the United States to convince the rest of the world that they should come along with us. They do because we have the money, we have the power. But as we're seeing right now in this meeting with, we had the Indian Prime Minister, Xi Jinping of China, Iran, we have Putin, all these leaders in Asia meeting to put together their own economic bloc. They are trying to provide an alternative to the European American economic bloc that has controlled this planet for the last 4, 5, 6 decades. And I would submit that if we want these countries in Africa, in South America, and Southeast Asia to come along with us and not go along with the Russians and the Chinese, we have to be honest. We have to win by having a standard that we apply equally to ourselves and to everyone else. If we want to be that shining city on the hill, it has to be done through honest reaching out to other countries where we respect their democracies, we respect their rule of law, and we don't interfere other than to offer honest help if they were to ask for it in order to elevate their economies and so they can raise the standard of living within their countries. That is the way forward. That is what I support. America first is not just about, again, America being first, although that is our first priority. It's also respecting other countries and letting those countries put themselves first. A rising tide raises all boats. And when we're doing well in the United States, when we're leading by example, that helps everybody else out. But if we're running all these clandestine operations to spread democracy in other countries, in the long run, I think it will backfire. And I think this Ukraine war is just another part of seeing how of this sort of these operations against other countries backfiring. We've been involved in Ukraine for 8 years now. Our State Department, our non-governmental organizations who fund democracy programs in other countries, which of course are fronts for the CIA. This is a strategy that will only lead to more conflict. So yes, Russia did invade Ukraine, but we had some responsibility in sort of baiting the hook so that Russia would invade. It doesn't make Putin a good guy. It doesn't make Putin right. It is just a reality of geopolitics and the role that our people in our country, the games they play geopolitically, and we have to understand that. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.